Okay, so good afternoon everyone. This is Mon Korean. So today I'm going live from Tiju's Academy, Tiruvalla. Hope you all are doing good. So let's start today's session. So today, as it's a continuation of what I have been doing the last and the week before that, that's the test preparation tips for IELTS speaking. So let's start off with the first slide and see what tips can be done or we can prepare for our examination. Okay, so test tip 1, the first tip for your speaking test. Learn to listen actively to give relevant responses. So as you know, you enter the examination room there, the examiner is there and you as well. Right, so now let's see what are the tips. The first is learn to listen actively to give relevant responses. This is quite an obvious one. You'll be speaking for about 85% of the time during the test. The rest of the time you'll be listening to the examiner asking you questions. If you don't listen carefully to the examiner, you won't be able to give relevant answers. So learn to listen actively by using the following strategies. A few strategies also in the next slide coming up for you guys. So what is it? As you know, in the speaking session, you will be doing the maximum speaking. That is about 85% of the time you will be speaking, and the examiner will be just asking you a few questions and he or she will be waiting for your answers or listening to your answers. But then again, listening is also a part of it, where you should understand what the examiner said or what question he put out or she put out to you. So I've set up a few following strategies on listening skills, how you can develop or understand your listening, and this is going to help you in your IELTS speaking. So our strategies kana. The first one is focus on keywords. For example, if the examiner asks you a question like, are traditional ways of cooking food disappearing? And you talk about traditional food, you haven't been listening actively. So question aanu, the examiner has asked you, are traditional ways of cooking food disappearing? Right? Pare kalath nammal cook cheyuna type of food, not the type, how cook was prepared, traditional ways of cooking food disappearing. And you talk about a traditional food. So random randai, the question is not being understood by you. So you haven't been listening actively. The keywords here were traditional ways of cooking food and not traditional food. So what are the traditional ways of cooking food? Maybe at those times, they must not be using the new ways of gas, so they firewood, coal, right? How food was cooked traditionally before, not a traditional food. So the question was totally misunderstood. Question aanengi misunderstood. So learn to focus on keywords. Don't be afraid to ask the examiner to repeat a question if you haven't heard it clearly the first time around, but just remember once or twice is fine. You can always, as I mentioned before, I said it before also, make sure if you don't understand a question, you always have the right to ask the examiner to repeat the question, but make sure it's not happening all the time. Once or twice is fine. And if you don't understand a particular word, you can ask the examiner to explain it to you. Or a word once you can ask the examiner, could you please repeat it for me, or can you just make it elaborated for me? And if you want clarifications, paraphrase the examiner's question by saying, so what you are asking is blah 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 blah. So what you meant is it this? Namala question paraphrase irte parayanam. So he or she may correct you when you go ahead. Avaru nammale correct you as we move ahead. Okay, next nokam. Also, the best way to prepare for the part 2 long-term topics is to learn to listen to podcasts, radio or TV shows, etc. So part 2 aanengi, that's your cue card or your task card. That's your long term. That's your cue card or your task card session. What can we do? Listen to podcasts, radio or television shows, so that you have enough material to speak on any given topic for more than 2 minutes or 2 minutes. The best way to ace this part of the speaking test is by brainstorming after having listened to the podcast, teletalk, audio clip on a particular subject. If you have listened to a podcast on your favorite kind of food, you can prepare your own talk by brainstorming ideas about your favorite dish, food item. You can make a mind map by using the WH questions such as, so namakku cue cards varum. So you know the cue card and the task card, how it works, a main question and some prompts below it. So most of the prompts, if you have seen, starts with a W or a H question. For example, I can show it to you guys. It was related to food, the question that we read. Now what are the prompts? The main question adil varna prompts, the WH questions is, what are the kinds of food available in India? Right? What? That's also WH. Which is your favorite food? Why is it your favorite food? Where is it commonly available? How is it prepared? Who prepares it well? Can you cook it or do you order it? What are the ingredients used in its preparation? And how does it taste? So these are the WH questions that you find 99.99% on your cue card or your task card after your main question. The prompts, that is what are the WH questions. So make sure you listen to these podcasts or teleseries or television or radio, wherever, right? You have so many materials. We have so many materials nowadays in Google, YouTube. You just Google it, YouTube, you can find it anywhere, right? And then prepare it and practice. So what, which, why, where, how, who, what, how. This is the pattern that is followed in almost most of the cue cards or your task card questions, the WH questions. If you're when, where, when, where, what, who, how. So the more you practice, the better you become. So make sure you listen to the televisions, you watch televisions, listen. There are so many Google Jidu Noka, IELTS in the material ningalku kettum. You can find it in Google or you can find it. YouTube has plenty of it. If you just go to YouTube, you'll find plenty of it. Listen or watch your Netflix, your Amazon series, and then prepare yourself. Short series, short videos conductor. Try to prepare it and try to speak for 2 minutes. And this is gonna help you. Okay, let's move over to the next slide. After the long turn, that is, after your long turn is your cue card or your task card, that's your 1 minute of preparation and 2 minutes of speaking. After the long turn, you are expected to discuss the topic at length with the examiner. In this part of the test, you have to be able to justify your stand, exemplify your responses, and make comparisons with situations in the past and the present. For example, the questions that can be possibly asked in part 3, that is your follow-up, on the topic of food could be about people's eating preferences, healthy eating versus junk food, how food is grown. So make a list of the possible questions using the brainstorming methods shown above and prepare your answers accordingly. Listen to what other people have to say on the subject of food. In short, listen and brainstorm if you wish to get a higher band on the criterion of fluency and coherence. So endana. So once your cue card is over, once you're done with your cue card, then you move on to the follow-up sessions. That's your part 3. Follow-up, as you all know, you need to answer any questions that's directed to you, a minimum of 4 to 5 sentences parangirikkanam. Then how can you extend your answers? You need to justify your stance by exemplifying your responses and to make comparisons with situations in the past and the present, right? Examples kodukkan pattum. There are most of the questions that you get are general questions. Avade personal questions choikkarilla. They don't ask you personal questions in follow-up. It all will be general. So you always have an option, or you always have a chance to give examples. So this way you'll be able to extend your answers. Namakku aa samayathu answers extend cheyan pattum. That's in your part 3 or your follow-up session. So let's move over to the next slide and see what that slide says. Tip 2. So learn words from lexical fields to improve your vocabulary. So as you know, vocabulary also plays an important role in your speaking. That also consists, or that criteria gives you 25% of the mark. So vocabulary improvement. Don't just mug up a word list that has difficult words and then use them randomly in the speaking test, like plethora or mesmerizing or aesthetic. Instead, build lexical fields on commonly asked topics that will enrich your vocabulary and help you get a higher score in the test. I've said this before also. Mumbate kore videos I've said it. It's always good. There are lots of apps that you can download and where you can get synonyms. And getting synonyms is the best way. Learning synonyms of, for example, you have a word and then you have the meaning and then the same meaning change yata, there are other words. That is how you increase your vocabulary. Instead of using the same word over and over again, make sure you increase your vocabulary or improve your vocabulary, and then you need synonyms for it. The more words, the better for you. So these words like plethora, mesmerizing and aesthetic, that's common words. That plethora means a lot, mesmerizing is something that's out of the world, aesthetic is something that is an experience or a moment when you are really happy or overjoyed. So these are some words, but instead make a list of words or practice words with synonyms, and that's going to help you in your vocabulary. For example, if you are preparing for a topic on food, make a list of all the uncommon words from the lexical field of the taste of the food, like delicious, savory, spicy, tart, piquant, pungent, right? There's bitter also, you can add in bitter, right? So these are some of the synonyms that you can, or these are some of the vocabulary or the words that you can use when it comes something related to food. Also, Google some phrases and idiomatic expressions on food. Finger licking good, melts in one's mouth, have a sweet tooth, everything from soup to nuts. So these are a few idioms that you can also add. And as you know, if you need a higher band score, somewhere around 7.5, 8, our range il ponengi, it's always good to use idiomatic phrases. Why? Because that is the way how natives speak. And make sure, when you use these idioms and phrases, idiomatic phrases, don't force it. Right? If you need a good score, don't force it so that you're going to get a good score. No, it doesn't work. It has to come out naturally. IELTS is all about your natural speaking ability. So don't force these idioms. When you practice, try to incorporate these idiomatic phrases in your daily practice sessions. That's how it's going to come out to you naturally when you go for your examination. Right? And try to use these words and phrases as naturally and relevantly and meaningfully when talking about that topic. So you have to be natural, it has to be meaningful, and also it should relate to that topic. Similarly, you can make vocabulary list for all other commonly asked topics on the IELTS speaking test. This will help you to showcase a wide range of lexical resource and help you achieve a higher rating for this criterion. So, as I mentioned before, vocabulary ki varangi, you have to practice a lot of new words. And these words, it's not that it has to be difficult words. Small words, ഒരു ഇഷ്യൂ ഇല്ല. ബട്ട് മേക്ക് ഷുവർ ഇൻസ്റ്റെഡ് ഓഫ് യൂസിങ് ദ സെയിം വേർഡ് ഓവർ ആൻഡ് ഓവർ അഗെയിൻ, ഒരു വേർഡ് തന്നെ കുറേ പ്രാവശ്യം നമ്മൾ സംസാരിക്കുന്നതിനേക്കാളും നല്ലതാണ്. യൂസ് synonyms and then practice it in your daily practice sessions wherever you are practicing at home or in an institute or wherever you go, and incorporate it every day, and that's how you're going to get new words and understand the meaning. The main thing is understanding the meaning of that word and then where you can use that word in your speaking according to the situation and according to the questions that's been asked to you. Okay, now let's move over to the next slide. Test tip 3. So the third one, that's related to your grammar. Learn to think in English to avoid basic grammar mistakes. Fair enough. So most of us, as I mentioned, have our own mother. We don't speak English. That's not a native language, right? Or it's not a mother tongue. We speak in our own native language or the mother tongue that we are born and raised in. So learn to think in English to avoid basic grammar mistakes. So when you try to convert anything from your mother tongue or your mother language or your native language to English, the things change. It doesn't work like that. English is totally different from Malayalam or any other languages that you speak at home. So make sure you learn to think in English to avoid basic grammar mistakes. So namakadu nokam endana. Many of us tend to think in our mother tongue and then translate the sentences literally into English while speaking. This leads to several grammatical errors as the sentence structure of Indian languages are different from that of English. It also slows down the speech rate as it takes too much time while we think in Hindi or any other language, made Malayalam, and translate it in our head and then speak in English. You think in English to speak in English, maybe your mother tongue is Malayalam, Hindi, or Telugu, Tamil, whatever, whichever language you speak. Though what happens? You think in that way and then you immediately transfer it or change it into English. So what happens? The grammar totally changes. Grammar totally change out. It doesn't work like that. As the first step to learning to think in English, start thinking of commonly used words in English. Then move on to phrases, followed by thinking in full sentences, and finally have conversations about a topic in your head in English instead of thinking in English, other languages like Malayalam or Hindi or any other. Do this regularly for at least half an hour a day, and soon you'll be able to develop the skills of thinking in English. This will enable you to eliminate some common grammatical errors, especially those of word order, and help you achieve a higher band score for grammar. So the moment you start thinking in your mother tongue and translating it directly to English in the same way, it's going to be a big mistake. It's going to be a big error. Adoru velliyoru error otu marum. So as I said, as the first step to learning to think in English, start thinking of commonly used words in English. Small words and phrases. Then move on to bigger words and bigger phrases, tougher words and longer phrases. And then think in full sentences, and finally have conversations about a topic in your head in English. First thing is, try to think it in English, past tense, present tense, future tense, whatever tense the question has been asked to you or directed to you. Make sure you think in that way instead of translating it from your mother tongue to English, because that's not going to work. Okay, now let's move over to the next slide. Let's see what does this slide say. The last one, that's your pronunciation. So we had discussed about each criteria. Now we are discussing the last one, that's pronunciation. So test tip 4. Learn to listen to the music of English to improve your pronunciation. Listening to music. So every language has its own music. It's just not enough to know the right pronunciation of the word. Most Indian languages have a stressed, timed rhythm, whereas English has a syllable timed rhythm, where you have to stress which syllable, right? In order to achieve a higher score on the criteria of pronunciation, you must learn to use the specific intonations, stress patterns, and rhythm of English in order to be understood easily by a native speaker of the language. And that brings us back to where we began. You have to develop the habit of listening carefully to how good speakers of the language use stress and intonation patterns in their natural way of speaking or in their speech. So what can we do? You can watch videos of tongue twisters and record yourself practicing them. Listen back and start all over again until you get it right. So the moment you start listening to English or start watching English movies or podcasts, or there are so many, you can watch Netflix series or Amazon, there's plenty of plethora, as I mentioned before, of options available in the social media. So the moment you start watching these, right, and then you always have an option where you can subtitles, you can switch it on. You have the option of switching on the subtitles. If you have a smart television or in your phone, subtitles on akwaning, you can read it as well, right? And this is going to help you improve your pronunciation, right? Once you listen how this word is pronounced and you practice it, it will help you. And moreover, there are many apps, as I mentioned before, not only for pronunciation synonyms. All you need to do is just type in the word that you find difficult in pronouncing, and once you click on the speaker button, it automatically namakku the pronunciation correct aayittu kittum. And all you need to do is practice it. How to pronounce. As I mentioned before, pronunciation and accent is totally different. Don't get confused with the accent part. Pronunciation is all about where you have to stress, where you have to give intonation. That is what is all pronunciation about, not the accent. So these were the tips that I had prepared for you this week, that are on the 4 tips for your speaking test. Pronunciation undarnu, grammar undarnu, vocabulary undarnu, and your fluency. So I hope these tips have helped you and will help you in the future as well. So keep practicing, and I'll see you next time in my next live session. So this is Mon Korean signing off from Tiju's Academy, Tiruvalla. Take care. Goodbye.